back, my dear YouTubers. Today we're gonna go over Temple. Temple is a hard machine released, I don't think recently, but I found it by chance when I was browsing what machine I will do for this video. So basically this machine is hard and it's required you find two flags. So as always, let's now step to the board and explain the concepts. So in this video here, we're gonna go over SSTI and Logstash. So the very first thing that we will do all the time is we do port scan, right? Now, when we do port scan, we will discover that there is port 61337. So under this port, there is a Python web server running. So we take a note that under this port, we have Python, let's say Python powered web server. So when we encounter such web server, alright, that's powered on Python, we immediately think of vulnerabilities that affect mostly Python. So SSTI, or server-side template injection, which is different from server-side request forgery. Server-side template injection is a kind of vulnerability that hits template engines powered by Python. So how do we reach this conclusion? So basically, when we go over this port, we run directory search using GoBuster. Okay. Now, for all hard machines, I don't demonstrate, or I don't show how to use GoBuster, since you're expected to know how to use it if you are running this machine. So this machine is hard, and GoBuster is one of the basic things that you learn when you first step into this field. So GoBuster, we use a word list directory, as always, medium. Okay. Now, surprisingly, this machine is hard that you need to run GoBuster multiple times. So first we discover a directory called /temporary. Okay. And then what you will need to do, you will need to run GoBuster one more time on this directory. And you will find additional directory / I remember it was dev, and then /register, or new account, sorry. So the level of directory brute forcing is actually 3. That's the first level, the second level, and lastly you will find a directory called new account. In addition to that, you will also find another directory /login. Okay. Now we know that when we encounter login pages, we immediately think of two things. We immediately think of SQLi, okay, and password brute force. So for this machine, these two methods will not work. And armed with the knowledge that Python or the web server is run on Python, we actually start to think about SSTI, server-side template injection. So the thing about server-side template injection is that you try a couple payloads. Okay, now let's open a new page and see how the methodology works on this. So SSTI, okay, the methodology behind testing for SSTI is that the first thing is we test couple payloads. So payload testing. Now most common payloads in SSTI are actually supposed to evaluate to a mathematical expressions. An example payload will be, so two prices here, 7.7, very popular payload. Let me do this. Okay. Now what's gonna happen here is that we try to inject this payload into an input field. Okay, put it here. Now this input field could be found in a login form, registration form. So you could find it under login form. You can find the fields in a registration form, or you can find this in search boxes, and also you can find this in comment boxes. So whenever you see whenever you see input fields, try to do payload testing first. if you want to find out if the server is vulnerable to SSTI. So if the expression here is evaluated to 49, or the result of the mathematical expression, it means that the server is vulnerable because it's executing whatever in between the curly braces. Now there is a couple payloads also you can try. This is not the only payload, it's only an example. But here I'm showing the methodology. Now that's the first step. The next step in SSTI is we try to find out what is the kind of template engine used. So the kind of template engine for SSTI is based on abusing and manipulating template engines. That's why we look for template engines type. So most probably we have three types. The first one is Twig, and we have Mako, and we have Jinja 2. Jinja 2, yeah. So these are the most common types of template engines. Now, since we are dealing with Python-based web server, the expectations or the speculations are that we either deal with Jinja because it's based on Python, or Mako. Now what about Twig? So Twig is for PHP based web servers. So this one out of the list. We ruled out Twig now because we know that it is Python based web server here. Alright, so what about how do we know whether it is Mako or Jinja 2? It actually depends on the payload that worked for you. If a payload that renders a mathematical expression worked for you, then the template engine would be Jinja 2. Okay, if it was not a regular expression, mathematical expression payload, then the template engine is Mako. That's how we find out. So after we know what payload works and what kind of template engine, we now go to the exploitation step where we actually try to convert SSTI into RCE, and this is done using several kinds of payloads that we will talk about in this video. Now the unique thing about this video is, about this scenario, is that in our scenario here in Temple THM, you need to be applying some filters on the payload. So sometimes SSTI payloads will not work if you directly inject them in the field, so you will have to do some filtering. So in this scenario we will use a payload that is actually using filters bypass. So we're gonna use like x26, and this corresponds to dot, and some characters like dot, underscores, and ampersands are filtered by the web application. So the only way to bypass them is we convert them into other forms of characters. Alright, so that's about SSTI. Now once we get access to the server, and now we have the foothold, and you will see that the first user that you will be greeted with is Bill. So Bill is the user that you will find once you get the foothold. So what's going to happen here is that, as always, when we start with Linux prev escalation, all right, so we have multiple things to do. The first thing is we see if we have SUID bit binaries, right? We see also if the current user, what are the commands that it can run as sudo. So by running sudo -l, you can also look at cron jobs and many other things. Now in this scenario here, neither of these worked. So you could, if these didn't work for you, and if you want to save your time, you can immediately use limpis. So rule these out and use limpies. So you can use limpies, upload limpies to the machine and start it. Use automated methods. But don't lose your hope. There's one more thing you can do. If these failed, okay, and other manual methods failed, you can also look at the processes that are run under root. So ps aux and then grep root. This will show you the processes and services running as root, which is tremendously important because you want to be root. So you want to find out what are these services and what are these processes. In this scenario, when we run this, we see that there is a service called Logstash. This service is running as root. So it immediately became our point of interest. So Logstash, what's Logstash? So Logstash is a service used for handling, parsing, and transforming logs. So it works with logs. So how it works? So Logstash, it needs actually first an input. So for Logstash to work, you have an input. Okay. And then we have pipelines. All right. And lastly, we have the output. So in a real scenario, the input could be log sources. So log sources, such as syslog, event logs in Windows. And then you have the pipelines. The pipelines define how the logs are parsed, handled, and transformed. So the pipelines, you can take it as the rules, all right, by which Logstash handle the logs. So pipelines, you can configure pipelines if you go, by going to, well, there are two important files actually. The first one is pipeline.xml.yml. It is the YAML configuration file. And the next one is logstash.yml. Now, Logstash YML shows you what are the configuration files used by Logstash to run and handle the logs. Pipeline shows you the parameters, the parameters configuration of Logstash. And then you have the output. So if you want to exploit Logstash and escalate the privileges, what you're going to have to do, there are a couple steps, couple conditions that need to be met. The first one, Logstash need to be run as root. This is satisfied in our scenario. The next one, you will have, or you will need to have write access to one of the configuration files. The configuration files of Logstash are located under /etc/logstash. If you have write access to one of these, only one of them, okay, then the next condition is met. All right. Now the last one is that you need to be able to restart the Logstash service. If it is running as root, you won't be able to do this. But again, we don't lose hope. We can take a look at one of these configuration files, and if the Logstash is configured to reload based on a set time interval, then we're gonna wait for the set time interval to be achieved and realized. Then the Logstash service will be reloaded automatically by its own and use the configuration file that we have modified. Now the configuration file that we modified depends on the scenario, of course. We put a payload inside this configuration file to whatever you want to do, like escalate the privileges to become root and achieve what you want. So that is for Logstash, that is for SSTI, and that is for the scenario. Now let's step to the practical scenario. All right. So as I demonstrated first at the earlier in this video, these are two directories that you can. These are the pages that you can find when you run directory search. So first you have login. Let's change the IP. And the next one is directory where you can register. All right. So also I demonstrated in the video or earlier in the video that we know that the application is using Python to run the web server. So now it's now out of the mind that we will go immediately to test for server-side template injection. The reasons are demonstrated at the very first of the video, so you can get back, or you can shift the video back a bit in time to be able to see why I'm immediately now going to test for SSTI. Alright, so how to test for SSTI? Again, we're gonna type the payloads, right? So we're gonna need some payloads. Let's go to this, looking for the server side. Okay, so here in the notes, let's go to, alright, you can try this, 2 plus 2. So 2 plus 2, an email would work. I'm gonna type my name at temple THM, and the password, any password would work. Register. Okay, now once we see account created, we can go to login and log in with the username we have just created. So the username is this, right? And the password is the password. So now we're gonna log in. If we see that this expression has been evaluated to 4, which is the result of this mathematical expression, then we know that it is vulnerable to SSTI. Okay, this is the dashboard. Now we go to account, and we see here logged in as, instead of seeing your name, you see 4. And the reason is that the web application has executed this payload, which means it's vulnerable to server-side template injection. Now there are other payloads to try, of course. For example, we can try this, and we can try this. Let's see this one. Let's create a new account and try with this one. So log out, and here we're going to create a new account using this payload, Matasan v2, and the same password, account created. Now we're going to use this payload again while we log in, and the password. Let's see now what's going to happen. Account, internal server error. So this payload didn't work. Fresh. Alright, so we're going to log out. We're sorry for crashing the server. Alright, so this one didn't work. The one that worked is the one that evaluated to mathematical expression or mathematical result, which means that, as we also demonstrated earlier in this video, that the kind of template we are dealing with is Jinja 2. So what's the next step now? The next step, after we discover that the server is vulnerable to SSTI and we find a template engine, we're gonna now go to the exploitation phase. We have a couple payloads to try. I'm gonna make this very time saver for you guys. You can try this, but there is some sort of filter that is actually blocking some characters. Among the characters that are blocked is the dot is blocked, dash is blocked, underscore is blocked. So eventually we reach this payload where we use binary actually to we use binaries to bypass this. So this is a Python payload, but the original form is this. And this is taken from payload all the things in GitHub, if you're wondering about the source of this payload. So what we do, we just replace the filtered characters, such as these, with binary form. Now we take this one, okay, put it here in the registration. So what's gonna do here? As you can see, this is the command that I would like to execute. It's the ID, and this is only for proof of concept. Okay. Now, additionally, what else do we need? All right, so nothing. So here we try to bypass the filters that are blocking the ampersand, the semicolon, which they exist in the original form of the payload. Alright, let's register with this payload now. And here I'm going to type v3. Okay, and log in with the same payload. Account. Alright, so logged in as this. This is the output of the ID command. And now you know that you can start reverse shelling the machine, as they call it. So this is the user that we will get access to once we get access to the machine. So what do we do now? Let's create the payload, or let's create the shell first. Alright, so let me show you the content of this shell. Cat shell. This is the content of the shell. It's bash shell, as you can see, and this is my IP address, and this is the port. So I'm gonna host this using Python server, right? This is the command, and now it's being served on my web server. Alright, so I have this shell ready. I have my Python web server ready. The rest is downloading or rewriting the payload to download the shell and execute it. Of course, we're gonna need to launch the listener before doing anything. So we go back to the machine, here, and we log out. So now we'll create a new account, but here we're gonna change this. So what we can do here, you can this is the Python one. Let's take this one. So instead of ID, we're using curl to let the machine download the shell from my machine, and here I replace the IP with my real IP address. And don't forget the ports. So we have shell.sh, and we're gonna register with this payload. So register, email already exists. We're gonna change this to 4 and register. Now we go back to login. Remember, you need to register a new account for every payload you try. Okay. Now the password is the same. Go to account. Okay, so now as you can see, my web server has received the request to serve the payload, and I guess it has been served and executed. So now we get access to the machine, and the user is Bill. What's next? Privilege escalation. As we demonstrated in the earlier of this video, that we will go with the path or the manual path. So we're gonna search for this Logstash as I demonstrated first, ps aux, and grep for processes running as root. So these are the processes. As you can see, this one is eye-catching, which is Logstash. So what you're about to do here, let's first stabilize the shell. Okay. TTY, and then the xterm, Control Z, and lastly we type this, the SSTI. Okay, so as I demonstrated, guys, first let's go to cd etc logstash. So here I have these configuration files, logstash sample.conf. Unfortunately, I don't have access to this file. I cannot write on it. Judging by the permissions, only the root user or the root group, actually only the root user can write on this file. Even the root group cannot write on this file. So let's take a look now at the two most important files in Logstash, pipelines and Logstash YML. So cat Logstash. This is the content of the YML Logstash. Let's scroll to the very beginning. Alright, so let's take a look here. What do we have? This is the path data. All these are commented out, as you can see. Let's look at the lines where there are no comment. Take a look at this one. Config reload automatic true, which means that Logstash is configured to run or reload automatically, right? Now, this is very important for us. As you can see, the interval is 3 seconds, which means every 3 seconds, Logstash will restart on its own. That's the first condition which needs to be met in order to escalate to root using Logstash. Okay, let's now take a look at pipelines to see what are the configuration files used. So this is the contents of the pipeline, and as you can see, path config. The configuration files are stored under logstash conf.d, and it's configured to run all of the configuration files that do exist under conf.d. How do we know that? Using the wildcard. There is no specification for the name of the configuration file to be run. All the configuration files there that end with the extension.conf are configured to run. So we're going to go there and aim for our target under that directory. So by listing the contents of the directory, we see we have only one directory or only one configuration file. Taking a look at the permissions, since we need to aim, our aim is here is to be able to write on a configuration file. Judging by the permissions, see now the group root is able to write on this file. Bill is part of the root group, which means we can write on this file. So now we issue nano and we start writing our content. So here we have two pieces. We have the input and we have the output. So the input will be any command you would like to do or execute. So let me go to here and search for Logstash. Alright, this is the one. I'm gonna take this and paste it here. So this is the input. I think I'm gonna have to remove this one. Alright, so as I said earlier, guys, we have the input and output, and it's based on the mechanism or the working mechanism of Logstash. The input here, we specify the log source. Alternatively, since we are abusing the Logstash, the input will be the command that we would like to execute. So here we copy bash to the home directory of Bill, alright, to be able to execute it later. And then we give it sudo with permission and execution permission, right? So that when we execute shell will be a copy of bash and will give us root. And after 10 seconds, this will be executed. And this is the output. Output in this time for this scenario is not important. We don't care about the output. That's why we put dummy content. So we save this. And we cat, make sure that it's saved. Yeah, it's saved. So you may see that the terminal gets weird sometimes. All you have to do is just Control C. Okay, and then refresh this page on the account to respawn the shell. Alright, so now let's go to Bill home directory, Bill. And as you can see, the shell has been created. Now if we type shell -p id, right now as you can see, this is the root user. And right now you can see the root and be able to find the flags. So that was today's machine, guys. I hope you find this informative and as a great learning experience, and see you in the next video.